In the vast universe of Dune, there is an incredible multitude of characters. Some of them, especially in the books by Frank Herbert, appear as if they promise a fascinating storyline and then simply disappear. Others, like Duncan, Idaho, persist through the entire narrative, making it all the way to the very end. We remember, of course, that the first novel was initially presented as the story of the feud between House Atreides and House Harkonnen. In Frank Herbert's Dune Chronicles, there is a great deal of philosophy, but not so much about the actual history of the warring families. Some readers do not care about this at all. Others stubbornly try to read between the lines to uncover what the author left unsaid. Thus appeared the Dune Encyclopedia, in which fans of the series created their own version of the backstory to the Chronicles. It was partially approved by the author, but it never became canon. By the 5th and 6th installments of the original series, the encyclopedia already contradicted the main narrative. Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson, when they undertook the continuation of the universe after Frank's death, approached the matter from a different angle. Brian claims that he used his father's notes as a foundation, ideas that Frank simply did not have time to bring to life. Whether his prose is good, and whether the series lost something essential along the original style, that is for each reader to decide. Thanks to the prelude to Dune series, however, we have the opportunity to take a closer look at all three sides of the conflict: House Harkonnen, House Carino, and House Atreides. How did this feud develop, and what did it ultimately lead humanity to? Today, we will take a closer look at House Atreides and learn how just rulers turned into terrible tyrants. Why was even the name of this house virtually consigned to oblivion by the end of the Chronicles? Could it have been heredity? Some representatives of House Atreides claim that they trace their lineage back to the ancient Greek king Atreus, the very one whose son was the Agamemnon made famous by Homer's Iliad. By appealing to such a distant past, of which nothing remains but myths, the Atreides justify their right to a high position in society. In reality, however, the founder of this family was a boy from the old empire, spoiled by its comforts, named Andrew Skouros. Even as a teenager, Andrew concluded that society in the old empire had no future. Yet, he himself lived a life not much different from what was common in that society. He spent time playing computer games and, for entertainment, began studying history, especially the part dealing with the great battles of antiquity. Presumably, it was then that he became familiar with Homer's Iliad. In those distant times, old Earth, still quite habitable, was the center of the Empire, and the Empire itself had already spread widely across the galaxy. Naturally, not all worlds prospered, and dissent did not arise in the capital but on the distant planet Tleilax. A certain philosopher, whom many considered a visionary, came to Earth with progressive ideas, attempting to stir the complacent society. It was his sermons that young Andrew Skouros heard, along with his companion from an online game. Andrew then longed to become a general and a great warrior. Thus, Andrew Skouros' gaming nickname became his real name, one that would frighten children thousands of years later. That name was Agamemnon, which Andrew adopted after supposedly tracing his ancestry to the ancient Greeks. Together with his beloved, Andrew Agamemnon joined the ideological leader of the revolution, Tlaloc. With only 20 followers, this small group managed to overthrow the old empire. The reformers called themselves the Titans, once again referencing ancient Greek mythology. After some time, Agamemnon and his beloved Juno grew constrained by the philosophically inclined Tlaloc. The two of them wanted power, and Tlaloc mysteriously died. Agamemnon and Juno took control of most of the old empire. They were still human when they became terrible tyrants, which led humanity to a great schism. Agamemnon sought only military victories and unlimited power, and so he found a way to become virtually immortal. Juno and Agamemnon were the first to place their brains into mechanical bodies and become Cymex. Having rid himself of a human body, Agamemnon nevertheless ensured his lineage by preserving a sufficient quantity of his genetic material. The Titans' luck eventually ran out. The cause of their downfall after 100 years of rule was their poor choice of allies. The wealthy and foolish Titan Xerxes provoked the emergence of Omnius, a universal mind. Upon achieving self-awareness, the thinking computer subjugated the unfortunate Titans. For 1,000 years, Agamemnon devised impossible plans for liberation from bondage. Only the desperate Butlerian Jihad gave him a chance, which the arrogant general ultimately failed to seize. Throughout those long centuries under Omnius' oppression, Agamemnon pursued a genetic program of his own. 13 sons were born to him by unnamed slave women. 12 he killed with his own hands, but he did not manage to kill the 13th. Agamemnon's final attempt to raise a biological child was Vorian, who took the surname Atreides. Naturally, the illustrious dukes later tried to avoid the details of their dynasty's founder. Over time, it was also forgotten that Vorian Atreides, at the beginning of his long life, was a loyal servant of the thinking machines. He sincerely admired his father Agamemnon and dreamed of becoming a Cymek himself, considering it the highest good. Vorian grew up with complete disregard for the value of human life, and his best friend was a robot named Sarah. Together with this machine, Vorian traveled across the synchronized empire delivering updates for Omnius. Raised to revere the thinking machines, the son did everything he could to please his mighty father. Vorian's life seemed to be mapped out in advance. Agamemnon, pleased with his last offspring, subjected him to a painful life extension procedure. Had he not delayed turning his son into a Cymek, things might have unfolded differently. But alas. Through the curiosity of the independent robot Erasmus, Vorian met the captive Serena Butler and fell in love with her. The fiery speeches of the strange slave overturned Vorian's entire universe. As if by chance, an uprising of human slaves erupted on old Earth, once again provoked by Erasmus. Despite the immense fury of the people, the rebels were doomed, and Vorian understood this better than anyone. That is why he seized the grief-stricken Serena, and the cunning leader of the revolt, Iblis Ginjo, stole a ship and fled to the League of Nobles. The defector was met with suspicion. Yes, he had saved the beloved daughter of the Viceroy, but Vorian did not conceal the fact that he had previously been an accomplice of the machines. In the end, people believed in his sincerity. Vorian Atreides joined the army of the merciless jihad that erupted in Serena's name. Here, Vorian Atreides truly came into his own. Thanks to his knowledge of Omnius and the Synchronized Empire, the defector quickly rose through the ranks. The operations devised by Vorian were always marked by cunning and precision, and thus were largely successful. The gift from his father, Agamemnon, allowed him to endure the entire jihad from beginning to victorious end, even though it lasted more than 100 years. As a commander, Atreides worked alongside Xavier Harkonnen, the former lover of Serena Butler. United by common goals and by shared unrequited love, the two even became friends. Later, however, Vorian betrayed his friend for political reasons. Xavier, who sacrificed his life in the name of human values, remained in public memory as a coward and a traitor. Vorian knew the truth, yet, even after the war, he made no effort to restore his friend's good name. While the Butlerian Jihad raged, Vorian's feelings for Serena gradually cooled. Or perhaps it was the voice of blood calling for offspring. The priestess of the Jihad had been sterilized by a ruthless robot and could no longer bear children. There were, however, many young women in various spaceports with whom the great hero conducted brief affairs. One such branch of his lineage produced the Reverend Mother Raquela Berto Anirul, who was Vorian's granddaughter. She, however, did not particularly claim kinship, and how many other descendants Atreides had in total, no one will ever know. But there was one woman Vorian truly loved. While resting on the peaceful, non-aligned world of Caladan, Atreides lived under an assumed name. There he met Leronica Tergiet. Later, he revealed his true identity to her, but left the planet swept away again by the whirlwind of war. Leronica managed to become pregnant with twins, and without hesitation, married a longtime suitor. Vorian's two sons, Estes and Kagan, believed another man to be their father, and Leronica did not expect the great hero of the Jihad to ever return. But Vorian did return. By that time, Leronica's husband had tragically perished at sea. Atreides married Leronica and gave his sons the family name. He also moved his family to Salusa Secundus, believing life in the capital to be safer. However, his relationship with his sons did not prosper. After Leronica's natural death from old age, Estes and Kagan returned to Caladan and completely severed ties with their father. Yet, what were such troubles to a long-lived hero? Merely moments in a life. Vorian's primary goal remained the Jihad. For the destruction of Omnius, the first Atreides deceived, maneuvered, and betrayed friends. Yes, he later suffered from pangs of conscience. But what are the moral torments of a traitor to those who paid with their lives for their trust? Vorian Atreides became especially renowned for several feats. First, it was Vorian Atreides who proposed cleansing old Earth with forbidden nuclear weapons. By that time, no living humans remained on the planet, while the army of the Jihad carried out its mission. Vorian infiltrated his former robot ship through deception. His very first friend, the robot Syrah, was attempting to save the memory sphere of Earth's Omnius aboard that vessel. Vorian deactivated the robot, stole the sphere containing the updates, and left his former friend drifting in space. Also, during the first half of the Jihad, Vorian cleverly protected the wealthy planet Poritrin from attack, where the servant Theo Holtzman and his associate Norma Senva resided. The specialists of the League of Nobles tried to study the stolen Omnius sphere but achieved no success. Once again, it was time for the cunning Atreides. This time he devised an excellent operation, infecting the memory sphere with a virus. Vorian located Syrah's ship in space, altered his former friend's memory, returned the infected updates to their place, and quietly departed after reactivating the robot. Unaware of the deception, Syrah continued his journey, carrying the infected software to the worlds of Omnius. This escapade inflicted perhaps the greatest damage upon the Synchronized Empire and might have destroyed it entirely, if not for the robot Erasmus. Near Corin, where the primary Omnius had settled after the fall of Earth, Erasmus tracked down and destroyed Syrah's ship. It cannot be said that the machine planets fell into the League's hands like hotcakes. Bureaucratic delays and human foolishness obstructed the Jihad, as they so often obstruct progress. Only the deaths of Serena Butler and Iblis Ginjo, along with an epidemic unleashed by Omnius, managed to rouse the drowsing League. Vorian Atreides, now commander-in-chief of the army of the Jihad, confiscated the space-folding ships from Aurelius Venport. Yes, it was presented as a voluntary donation, but still. Fearing further mischief from the Corin Omnius, who was attempting to restore control over the synchronized worlds, Vorian resolved upon the Great Purge. Secretly using forbidden computers for navigation, Vorian assembled a fleet of ships equipped with Holtzman engines. His plan was to strike many robot planets simultaneously and simply burn them with nuclear fire. On those worlds, alongside thinking machines, lived millions of human slaves. Vorian regarded them as collateral losses. Assisting him were Quentin Butler and his sons, Phycon Butler and Abelard Harkonnen. The latter Atreides had taken under his protection and even promised that, after victory over Omnius, he would reveal to humanity the truth about his grandfather, Xavier. With enormous losses due to navigational defects, the army of the Jihad managed to confine Omnius to Corin. Yet at that moment, the great hero Vorian Atreides failed to convince the League to continue the war. The Jihad was declared complete. Phycon Butler became viceroy, and his father, Quentin, became a Psymech. Quentin Butler had previously fallen captive to the Titans on Hesra. The great deeds of Vorian Atreides allowed his father Agamemnon and the remnants of the Titans to escape Omnius's control. These brains in mechanical bodies dreamed of regaining dominion over the galaxy, and thus refused alliance with the League of Nobles. Agamemnon and Juno waited for an opportune moment, while Vorian Atreides could not persuade the League of the danger posed by the Titans and Neo-Cymex. Expelled from a Landsraad session, Vorian decided to confront his father alone. It must be said that this perilous undertaking also succeeded. However, another friend sacrificed himself for Vorian, Quentin Butler, along with several unfortunate individuals forcibly transformed into Neo-Cymex. Vorian returned victorious, yet once again could not convince the war-weary people to finish off Omnius. Had Omnius remained quiet, this strange standoff might have continued for quite some time. But traitors to humanity, who had escaped the vengeance of Vorian Atreides and Abelord Harkonnen, continued devising weapons for Omnius against their own species. An attack by one such invention, mechanical piranha-like clamps, finally stirred the complacent League. Once again, Vorian Atreides and Abelord Harkonnen distinguished themselves, virtually neutralizing the threat alone. This time the Landsraad listened, and once again came the moment for Vorian's betrayal of a friend. The expedition to Corrin became Atreides' final feat as a hero of the Jihad, yet this deed cost his house a long and bloody feud. Omnius, of course, had no intention of surrendering without a fight. Into orbit before the fleet of the army of humanity were brought ships packed with human slaves. Once again, Vorian, like the machines, was prepared to dismiss them as collateral damage. But this friend and protege, Abelord Harkonnen, was no longer willing to accept another slaughter of innocents. Abelord disabled the weapons and reprogrammed their controls. Enraged, Atreides severed ties with him without even seeking explanation. Nevertheless, the Battle of the Bridge of Hrethgir was won thanks to the independent robot Erasmus. Through his sabotage, Omnius was defeated, Corrin captured, and, like many planets before it, burned in atomic fire. And Vorian Atreides, instead of restoring the good name of his friend Xavier Harkonnen, acted basely. What else can it be called? Abelord Harkonnen was brought to trial. Ironically, Vorian Atreides sincerely believed he was doing a benevolent act when he insisted on exile rather than execution. Yet, he also demanded that all Harkonnens be officially branded cowards and traitors. The deed was done. A furious feud was set in motion, one that would endure for 10,000 years. As for the great hero Vorian Atreides, he quietly faded from public view, unwilling to involve himself in politics any longer. While the newly formed empire licked its wounds, Vorian chose once more to taste the life of a simple farmer. On remote Kepler he found new love, a woman named Mariella. This time the hero of the Jihad did not hesitate, and simply married her. By the time Vorian was forced once again to step out of the shadows, Mariella was already very old. Yet they had many grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and other relatives. Indeed, in those distant times, the Atreides were remarkably prolific. And everything might have been fine if, while Vorian was away, slave traders had not attacked the planet. They abducted all the young and healthy members of the Atreides family and carried them off to Poritrin. Nothing new. Even after the devastating uprising of the Zen-Sunni slave population, this disgusting hedonistic world remained the center of galactic slaving. And the Empire tolerated slavery because it had been forced to strictly ban any robots. By that time, the Empire was ruled by the grandson of Phaikon Butler Carino, the weak and suspicious Salvador. Vorian Atreides, discovering the disaster on Kepler, first went to ransom his relatives and neighbors. He succeeded, and the captives returned home. Then Vorian went to the Emperor. There, having already lived more than 1 century, he first had to prove that he truly was the famous hero of the war. Fortunately, the Mad Butlerian barbarians had not yet completely broken Salvador Carino. methods of genetic verification were found. The people had not forgotten the struggle against the thinking machines and joyfully welcomed their idol. However, for Vorian Atreides, such overt public reverence came at the price of yet another separation from his family. Fearing for his place on the throne, the cowardly Salvador agreed to protect Kepler from slavers in exchange for Vorian Atreides disappearing once again. Only this time, it was meant to be final and irreversible. Vorian returned to Kepler to make sure the Emperor had upheld his part of the bargain. There, he said goodbye to his family and departed once more in an unknown direction. Vorian probably should have kept it from his beloved Mariella that he intended to go to Arrakis. Although, of course, it is unlikely that ignorance would have prolonged her life for long. Vorian worked tirelessly as an ordinary laborer. He had no idea that Griffin Harkonnen had followed him to Arrakis. The grandson of Abalord and his younger sister, Valia, lived for revenge. Together with the sisters from Rossack, Valia Harkonnen had discovered her enemy on Salusa Secundus when he visited the Emperor. Griffin set out to carry vengeance at his sister's command, since she was too occupied within her order. But Griffin, burning with righteous fury, was only half the trouble. The true danger came from an unaccounted-for brother and sister accidentally released from stasis by the Butlerians. These monsters had been created by Juno in secret, without Agamemnon and the other Titans knowing. She had practically turned them into nearly invincible androids, and only the deaths of the last Titan prevented Juno from deploying this dangerous weapon. Andros and Hela, once they became self-aware, quickly determined whom to thank for the deaths of their biological father and his beloved Juno. And, as usual, they set off in pursuit. Along the way, they brutally killed Mariella on Kepler, trying to force her to reveal her husband's whereabouts. After obtaining the information, the pair traveled on to Arrakis. There, in the depths of the deadly desert, the paths of the Avengers and their prey converged. As always, nothing good came of it. Vorian Atreides and Griffin Harkonnen, having ended up in a Fremen CH, were first forced to duel. However, Griffin, who managed to prevail, reconsidered his view of the family's enemy. After that, Vorian and Griffin tried to escape the desert together, but it was not to be. Andros and Hela caught up with them. It would seem fair if in the end Vorian fell to his bloodthirsty brother and sister, or if Griffin and Vorian defeated Juno's creations and went together to Lankyvale to end the feud. But there is no justice in this world, and a book needs conflict. So it happened that Griffin died foolishly, while Vorian managed to feed his relatives to a sandworm and escape. And in principle, it does not even matter that afterward, Atreides went to the Harkonnens, worked for them, secretly paid off their debts. The deed was done, and younger Harkonnens, Tula and Danvis, joined the dream of revenge. Driven either by guilt or by loneliness, Vorian Atreides eventually traveled to Caladan, once again with the naive goal of reuniting with his family. It seemed that everyone had long since forgotten this Atreides branch, and that no danger threatened them. Once again, Vorian was wrong. With access to birth records that had been kept by the sisters back on Rossack, Valia Harkonnen found him again. Now she sent her sister Tula to carry out retribution. The Harkonnen sisters did not know that Vorian himself was there. Their target was specifically Atreides' descendants. As soon as Vorian returned to Caladan, bloodshed began again. Tula Harkonnen managed to secretly kill Shandar Atreides and marry his nephew Ori. She killed Ori too, with chilling cynicism on the wedding night. Tula also tried to kill Vorian himself, but failed. The young woman had to flee. Bitter and intoxicated by grief, Vorian and Willem, brother of the slain Ori, set out in pursuit of Tula to take revenge. The chase yielded no results for a long time. Vorian and Willem visited Lankyville, then Chuseok. Willem wanted to destroy all Harkonnens, but Vorian understood that their actions were driven solely by his own deeds during the Jihad. On Chuseok, the Atreides encountered the fact that Tula was secretly protected by women of the Sisterhood, whose combat skills were almost on par with Vorian's. In a clash with the sisters, Willem was nearly killed, and only the intervention of the planet ruler's daughter saved the Atreides' life. Thanks to the procedure performed long ago by his father Agamemnon, Vorian recovered much faster than Willem, and in any case, he had been hurt less. While the younger Atreides was still licking his wounds, Vorian left Chusak. He traveled once more to Salusa Secundus, to the Emperor. Officially, his goal was to place Willem at court and secure for the Atreides the rights of a great house. The imperial throne was now occupied by Salvador's younger brother, Roderick Carino. He was a reasonable man and a wise ruler. Salvador, meanwhile, had been killed in the sands of Arrakis by Joseph Venport, and a civil war had erupted across the galaxy. The hero of the Jihad's request did not particularly burden the Emperor, whose own problems were far larger. In any case, Vorian's ambitious demands were merely a cover for yet another cunning plan. The elder Atreides, making sure that word of his route would reach Reverend Mother Valia Harkonnen, set out for Corrin. The Chusak princess was supposed to spread rumors of where he was heading, to lure Valia and Tula into a trap. Somewhere, the founder of the dynasty must have miscalculated. He did not expect Willem to follow him to Corrin, but overall the plan worked. The Supreme Reverend Mother Valia Harkonnen came personally to hunt Vorian. She was far better prepared for combat than the unfortunate Tula. Still, Tula was there as well. While Willem tried to settle matters with Tula, Valia dueled Vorian. She used the voice, but could not overcome the elder Atreides' mental strength. Willem nearly killed Tula, but he was stopped by the news that Tula was carrying Ori's child. These grand confrontations were interrupted by Corrin's ruler at the time, who put an end to the madness. Reverend Mother Valia contented herself with the sight of Atreides' ship exploding and withdrew to Wallach 9, to her sisters. However, Vorian Atreides once again escaped retribution and vanished in an unknown direction, this time forever. Willem Atreides returned to court. He received his place in the Landsraad, as Emperor Roderick had promised. Danvis Harkonnen achieved a similar position. Convinced that Vorian had been killed by Valia Harkonnen, Willem decided in revenge to destroy Danvis. A long feud broke out between them, with many deaths, both real and feigned. The result of this struggle was the strengthening of hatred between two houses that were not yet even great houses, and all because Willem's dying wish to end the war was distorted by a Keplerian cousin. Where did he even dig him up? Of all Willem's achievements, one is indisputable. He was recognized as the founder of the Atreides dynasty and ruler of their native Caladan. More than 10,000 years have passed since the days of Vorian Atreides and the Titan Agamemnon. The Empire is steadily ruled by House Carino, but its stability will soon come to an end. In vain, in vain did the Carinos forget both their kinship with the Harkonnens and the cunning of the Atreides. In any case, House Atreides is now a great house, ruled by a duke. A seat in the Landsraad, a share in Chom, everything aristocrats are entitled to. And, as a bonus, a peaceful, green, water-rich planet. The Atreides treat the natural resources of their domain with care, and their world resembles paradise. And we will briefly trace the last dukes of House Atreides, then move on. It is known that Paul Muad'Dib received his birth name in honor of his grandfather, the so-called Old Duke. Paulus Atreides was the 25th, the penultimate ruler of the Great House Atreides. Having undergone harsh military training from early youth, Duke Paulus truly was capable of personally leading his soldiers into battle. He did not shy away from dirty work, nor from speaking with even the lowest born of his subjects. At the same time, Paulus possessed strong diplomatic skills. He knew how to choose alliances correctly, and significantly strengthen his house's position in the Empire's political arena. During the Akazi Uprising, Houses Atreides and Vernius supported Emperor Elrod, which would seem to have ensured the loyalty of the imperial house. However, Paulus was betrayed by his passion for spectacle. He often took part personally in such strange entertainments as bullfights, killing these powerful animals for the amusement of the common public. In the end, one bull proved faster and stronger than the Duke of House Atreides, and rule passed to his son, Leto I. The upbringing the old duke gave his heir was categorically disliked by his wife Helena. Ne riches. Still, in the Padishah Empire, women's opinions were rarely of interest, and those who were listened to were mostly the Bene Gesserit sisters. Leto I, despite his mother's resistance, worked in his youth in the rice fields, and spent much time speaking with townspeople and common folk. His father, Paulus, instilled in him love and respect for the subjects Leto would one day rule. At the age of 14, he was sent to be fostered by the friendly house of Vernius on Ix. There, Leto became friends with the heir, Romber, and with his sister, Kylia. The three of them fled together when the Tleilaxu, with support from Shaddam IV, staged a coup on Ix. Although Leto I had more than enough justice, enough for himself and for others, he still fell short in diplomacy. The feud with the Great House Harkonnen is hardly surprising, but by supporting House Vernius, Leto Atreides crossed the Emperor, and his increasing influence in the Landsraad poured fuel on Shaddam's hatred. Is it any wonder the Emperor conspired with Vladimir Harkonnen to destroy the Atreides? Shaddam likely had reasons to fear for the strength of his rule. Leto I, despite his long relationship with Kylia Vernius, did not marry her, hoping for a more advantageous match. In a grand scandal touching the Emperor's secret interests, representatives of House Vernius became scapegoats, and the Great House Atreides once again emerged unscathed. Though not without the help of the Bene Gesserit. Leto did not recognize his son by Kylia as his heir, and later both the boy and his mother died tragically, victims of intrigue. We remember that the Bene Gesserit do nothing for nothing, don't we? The sisters, of course, had their own plans for the Duke. Thus, the young sister Jessica Nerys became Leto Atreides' concubine. Even the future lady herself did not know that she was the biological granddaughter of Vladimir Harkonnen. Naturally, Leto did not intend to marry her either, even when, against the Order's will, she bore him a son instead of a daughter. And when Leto did decide to marry, he made yet another diplomatic mistake. We all remember that House Akazi opposed the Emperor, and Duke Paulus Atreides helped Elrod Carino suppress the rebellion. So what drove Duke Leto to choose a bride from that house? A pull toward the rejected and downtrodden? In any case, the head of House Atreides' attempt to marry a young woman of House Akazi ended in another tragedy. The bride and her father were killed right at the wedding ceremony. It was done by agents of House Moritani, who were feuding with Akazi. The failed wedding turned into a full-scale war. The Great House Atreides did not shy away from vengeance. In that sense, the descendants of Vorian and Willem were no better than the Harkonnens. However, Leto's success in this undertaking did not fit Shaddam IV's plans. He, to put it mildly, disliked the Atreides. The Emperor intervened with his Sardaukar, supposedly a peacemaker. But how else might it have turned out? The problem with Moritani was that they traced their lineage back to the long-forgotten house Tantor, which in ancient times had fostered Xavier Harkonnen and later turned Salusa Secundus into a nuclear hell. One way or another, Leto I returned home alive, unharmed and unwilling to enter a legal marriage anytime soon. Time passed, Baron Harkonnen schemed, Emperor Shaddam grew angry, and the Duke of House Atreides pursued policies aimed at strengthening his house's position. He ought to have understood that his growing power greatly displeased the Emperor. In the end, he received a very dubious gift: governance of Arrakis. The family moved from idyllic Caladan into a trap-laden place in Arrakeen, inherited from the Harkonnens. Duke Leto, of course, understood he was being driven into a trap, but natural pride forced him to face danger head-on. Of course, the great houses maintained formidable forces, yet no one in the Empire could match the might of the Imperial Sardaukar. And if the Harkonnens alone had attacked the Atreides, the outcome would have been hard to predict. Leto I's true problem was that the idea of eliminating him belonged to Shaddam Carino himself. With the Emperor's full approval, and with disguised Sardaukar support, the Harkonnens attacked the Atreides. Through betrayal, they seized the Duke's household, killed his men, and took him prisoner. He died in captivity, trying to trade his own life for the life of his mortal enemy. But the pregnant Jessica and the heir Paul escaped and were taken in by the desert. Much has been written and filmed about Paul Muad'Dib, born an Atreides. Articles, videos, and everything else. He is, after all, the central figure of the Dune saga, and there is no getting around that. Even admirers of Frank Herbert, who deny the canonicity of his son's works, consider the first 3 books of the Dune Chronicles more important, if not simply the first 2. So, we will not linger long on Paul's story and will recall only what matters most. Muad'Dib's key discovery in the desert was that the Empire did possess a force greater than the Sardaukar. The local Fremen of Arrakis, who sheltered the fugitives, proved to be excellent warriors. Their life on a harsh, waterless planet involved hardships no less severe than existence on Salusa Secundus, polluted by atomic war. That is why the once peaceful Zensunni became fierce desert dwellers, always ready to claim the water from foreigners' bodies. Accepted as the prophet of Fremen legend, Paul Atreides gained an outstanding army, and by taking the deadly poison that transformed him into a true Kwisatz Haderach, Muad'Dib proved his right to be a spiritual leader. Gifted with prescience and an iron will, the young man overcame the resistance of the Harkonnens and the Sardaukar, and by calculating his tactical moves correctly, Paul forced not only the unfortunate Emperor to his knees, but also the all-powerful Spacing Guild. That was absolute victory. Naturally, enemies could not be left alive or left on the throne, but Muad'Dib was still unaccustomed to senseless cruelty. He took the throne from the Carinos peacefully, marrying Princess Irulan and compelling Shaddam to sign an abdication. And yet, Emperor Paul Atreides could not look calmly into the future. What he saw there burned him from within. Thus consumed by moral torment, Muad'Dib turned into a dreadful tyrant in only 12 years. Even some Fremen were ready to rise against him. After surviving several assassination attempts, the death of his firstborn, the loss of his beloved, and the loss of his superhuman gift, the blind emperor abdicated and went into the desert. Undoubtedly, he expected to meet his death there. But by irony of fate, death awaited him in the capital, at the hands of the priests of the cult created in his name. It should be admitted right away that the Atreides Empire is neither better nor worse than many others. How do you keep thousands of worlds scattered across the galaxy in a single grip? Simple. Only through tyranny. Regent Alia Atreides. After Paul Muad'Dib abdicated, Alia Atreides, his preborn sister, ascended to power. She ruled in the name of her brother's children, the twins Ghanima and Leto II. Under Alia's influence, the empire effectively turned into a theocracy that imposed faith in the new prophet everywhere. The bloody jihad, begun as an attempt to prevent the empire's decentralization, became an endless war for belief. And if only that had been the problem, Alia Atreides, born with an enormous reservoir of ancestral memory, became a reverend mother while still in the womb. This damaged her mind, and the voices of dead relatives on her mother's side gave her no peace. Unlike the specially trained Bene Gesserit sisters, such as her mother Jessica, Alia Atreides could not cope with the danger. During her regency, the young woman completed her transformation into the abomination the Bene Gesserit so feared. Possessed by the spirit of her grandfather, Vladimir Harkonnen, Alia pursued a destructive policy. She surrendered herself completely to the will of the Baron she had killed with her own hands, a man who never ceased being the mortal enemy of her house. Only the gods know how this might have ended. If Alia's nephews, the heirs to the throne, had not possessed the same pre-born gift. They managed to defeat their aunt and expose her, yet this victory ended inhumanely with the death of the defeated. God Emperor Leto II. Perhaps if one looks closely at the Dune Chronicles, the central character is in fact Leto II, not Paul Atreides. It was this emperor who managed to walk the golden path that had so terrified his father. At the age of 9, forced to hide from conspirators, resist the machinations of his own aunt, and battle the voices in his mind, Leto II was able to make the right decision. He emerged victorious from a struggle imposed on a child by adult uncles and aunts. But in Frank Herbert's work, no success comes for free. The heroes must pay a price you would not wish even on an enemy. Leto II Atreides became the God Emperor and ruled for 3,500 years. The second and last representative of his house on the imperial throne, he deliberately guided the empire toward its eventual fragmentation and destruction. Such was the golden path seen by the true Kwisatz Haderach in Melange visions. The God Emperor remained in human memory as a dreadful tyrant, an inhumane monster, a butcher. Yet it was thanks to him that humanity survived and clawed its way out of the swamp into which the Butlerian Jihad had driven it. To save the species, Homo sapiens, Leto II paid with his personal humanity, in both the literal and figurative sense, becoming an enormous sandworm and a ruthless ruler whose name would be used for centuries to frighten children. The first question is, why Empress? After all, she was Leto II's twin sister. Yes, she was. But here, everything is simple. Once Leto II entered symbiosis with Sandshroud, he ended any lawful claims to the throne from other houses. The Atreides, and only the Atreides, would lead the empire to its final dissolution. Of course, the brother did not sleep with the sister, and he had no need to. The God Emperor had his own genetic program, also dictated by the Golden Path. And the key place in that program belonged to his sister Ganima. Why not the endless Golas of Duncan, Idaho? Simply because Ganima's descendants served not one goal, but several. Ganima's consort was made the last heir of House Carino. Thus, after many thousands of years of feud and attempts at mutual destruction, the offspring of both Harkonnen lines and the Atreides were united in a single family. Ganima seemed to settle an old score. House Harkonnen ended with her, as the great-granddaughter of Baron Vladimir. House Carino, once House Butler, also traced its lineage to a Harkonnen, but from the falsely slandered Xavier. That was it. The end of the feud between families. The end of the struggle for the throne. And only after resolving urgent political matters and ending the vendetta could they turn to the breeding program itself. It was Ganima's descendants who carried the gene that allowed them to hide from prescience. And it was precisely on this that the God Emperor spent 35 centuries, until Siona appeared, the daughter of the Majordomo, Monio, a young woman whose actions Leto II could not foresee. And of course, she was an Atreides, which did not prevent her from killing her distant ancestor. Leto II's golden path moved into a new phase, while the great worm himself broke apart into myriads of Sandshroud. Ganima herself lived for about 300 years, and, miracle of miracles, died quietly of old age. A good, and most importantly, a rare death for this family. As Frank Herbert states, by the end of Leto II's reign, the descendants of Ganima Atreides and her consort Ferradan Carino were already countless, and their defining trait was not only that they were all, in part, Atreides, they were all invisible to future sight. What the Ixians invented as technology, the Atreides family achieved through genetics. Yes, it was a long road, and to obtain Siona, the God Emperor had to work very hard. But she, unlike his beloved Huinori, could pass that ability onward to her offspring. And they did not need to be raised in a special room cut off from the real world. After Leto II's death, however, the Empire fractured and terrible times began. The blood of the Atreides scattered across the universe, serving as a kind of delayed action bomb. People felt no gratitude, and so bearing the name Atreides became unfashionable or even dangerous. And yet, Frank Herbert did not allow his favorite heroes to simply vanish into oblivion, since he had appointed them as the saviors of humanity. That is why the most celebrated Bashar of the Bene Gesserit order is once again an Atreides. Even though he bears the name Miles Teg, if people lived as long as the God Emperor, they would easily recognize in Miles the traits of Leto I, the ancient Duke of Caladan. Miles Teg was an indispensable aide to the last two Mother Superiors of the Bene Gesserit. So indispensable that after the Bashar's death on Arrakis, the sisters created a Ghola of him. And that Ghola, in turn, helped to defeat the honored Matres and then unite the two warring orders. And again, he was a faithful noble and just man, who, without the slightest hesitation, gave up his life for the Bene Gesserit, whom he served. We recently mentioned that being an Atreides near the end of the Dune Chronicles was not exactly accepted, if not outright dangerous. That is true, but at the very end, the secrets of the God Emperor were revealed precisely to Darius Atreides, who was considered a direct descendant of Ghanima Atreides. Darius did possess a measure of prescience, though she could not be compared to Muad'Dib or Leto II, and the latter had taken care that this gift would not grant its owner too much. Still, one can safely assert that Darius Atreides was the one Reverend Mother who could lead the Bene Gesserit along the right path, even if that required sacrificing many, even if it meant entering a real war, even if it meant giving up her own life. In the end, it would still save the Order, and with it, the future of humanity, once again hanging by a thread. One can feel very differently about the Great House Atreides. Even Frank Herbert, who clearly holds warm feelings for the heroes of this house, does not make them unambiguous. The lives of these aristocrats constantly seem to sway on scales, and no one can say what outweighs what in their lives, good or evil, loyalty or betrayal, wise decisions or mistaken ones. As for the so-called expanded Dune, the authors there simply tried to bring balance. You may accept or reject their interpretation of events. You just have to remember that there are readers who love prequels. And that's all from me. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to rate it, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell. Your activity is the best reward for me. Thank you for your attention. See you soon. Bye.